And I'm here with a guest. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Ben Sigel, and I'm a candidate for Congress in the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District.
All right, so what motivated you to run for the seat?
There are a few things. The first is, just like so many people, I was so sick and tired of the divisions in this country. I was tired of being divided by race, being divided by income, being divided by geography, by abilities, and by loves, because I really truly believe that we can only solve the biggest issues of the day if we come together as a community. And I didn't see any other candidates talking about how we can be stronger as a community and be united as a community, because I believe that the foundation to any strong community is access to opportunities. It's what we're all looking for. And in order to have access to opportunities, you need someone who can be a bridge builder, a unifier, and connector. And I believe I'm that person. And I believe that in order to solve the big issues of the day, you need someone who hasn't just been talking about, but also has been advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. You need someone who's worked with all three major sectors of our economy: the government, nonprofit, and the private sector, because we need all three in order to solve those problems. And finally, I jumped in because I didn't see someone running who was connecting all the communities that we have, all 34 cities and towns in the district together, and someone who actually stood in the shoes of the majority of the community. What do I mean by that? I grew up in a middle-class, hardworking family in Braintree, in a town similar to the majority of the district. My dad oversaw public housing authorities and auditing them in Taunton and Fall River. My brother lives in Franklin, my cousins grew up in Sharon, and I've been in Brookline since 2003, and my kids have gone to school in Newton and in Brookline. Having someone that understands what it's like to have the financial burdens of the middle class, someone who understands what it's like to have financial debt because of the student loans that I have, someone who understands what it's like to raise 4 young kids like I do and try to balance when both parents are working and you're trying to do the best for your kids. I've had that experience. And finally, I've sat on the boards of over a dozen nonprofits and committees of over a dozen nonprofits. So I understand what it's like to strengthen communities from the inside and to create partnerships and relationships in order to strengthen the broader communities. I'm the current president of the Hispanic National Bar Association and would be the first Latino ever elected to Congress from Massachusetts. And I'm someone who has strengthened communities and partnerships together, creating the first young adult Jewish Latino task force in the country and the first young adult Jewish Muslim task force in the country. So I've worked on partnerships. I've worked in all three sectors. I know how to be a bridge builder and bring people together. And I want to stop the divisions that are happening and try to narrow the inequality gap that we're seeing.
All right. Maybe we want to look a little bit more at what is your professional background? I mean, you've touched on it some in your last response, but you talked particularly about interacting with those 3 sectors that you think are so important. So why don't we start with there and maybe specific examples that you can think of?
Sure. Look, at my first job out of college was working at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and working at the Democratic Caucus, helping to promote a national Democratic agenda. I did that starting in 1998. So I've worked on the government side and I've been a Democrat this whole time working to promote that agenda. I then have worked as an attorney for the last 15 plus years in private firms. And in the last 3 years, I was our national director of all client and community relations. So what does that mean? My job was to figure out what were we doing right with our clients, what were we doing wrong and helping to correct it, trying to figure out how we can be more helpful to solve the business issues of our clients. And finally, internally, because our law firm was a national law firm, is how do you break down silos for better collaboration so you can be a more efficient and effective law firm to solve these business problems. But while I worked in the law firm, what really put me to sleep at night and what I really loved was sitting on all these boards and nonprofits. And so one was I created the Young Jewish Leaders Council, which was for the first time in the entire country, we brought together all the Jewish young adult organizations around a table in the greater Boston area. We did that for networking reasons because we want people to get to know each other. We want people to understand and trust each other. We did it to learn best practices because there are always other people working on the same issues and we can learn from them. And we also did it for skill training and for skill building and to learn better practices going forward. That's actually how I would govern myself, is to bring all 34 cities and towns around the same table, a table that would be diverse based on age, based on race, based on income, so we can get to know each other better, we can interact and understand each other better, and so that we can actually solve some of the biggest problems together and learn best practices.
All right. So then what would be some of your top policy positions should you be elected?
Look, what we're seeing right now is there are major structural inequities and disparities going on in our country, and they're only being exposed more and exasperated more by COVID-19. We need to help the most vulnerable in our community. So what would I do? Right away on healthcare, we need to have universal access to high quality, affordable healthcare for everyone. That includes all undocumented immigrants, because we know that when one person doesn't have healthcare coverage, it puts all of us in danger. So that's number one. But part of that is I would right away push for having paid family and medical leave of at least 18 weeks. Look, I have 4 young kids, and for 2 of our kids, my wife worked in the federal government, and we didn't get 1 day of paid family and medical leave from that. We can't be the only industrialized country in the world not to have paid family and medical leave. Staying on the theme of healthcare, the third thing that I would do immediately is make sure that the federal government can negotiate prescription drug prices under Medicare. Right now, we can't do that, even though we're the biggest purchaser of prescription drugs. So that's healthcare. Under education, and this is a big issue for me, we need to make sure we have universal preschool. Because we all know that if you can write and read at an earlier age, you have a better chance to be successful. So we're going to start with universal preschool, and then we're going to have far more investment in our K through 12 schools, investment in our teachers, but also we're going to teach more cultural competency to our teachers and to our students. What do I mean by that? Number one is, I think you might know this, but 20% of the students in Massachusetts K through 12 right now are Latino, but only 3% of the teachers are. We need teachers that either understand what these students are going through, but also can be role models and leaders for them, and to help them get to college or get to community college or just get a job afterwards that's going to pay them a living wage. We also have to make sure that we are combating hatred, bigotry, and anti-Semitism at an earlier age, teaching that lies and stereotype and prejudice can turn into hate and a lot worse. So that's our K through 12. We then must make sure that higher education is affordable and accessible, because we are seeing communities of color and low-income communities now less likely to go to college than they were before. So what are we going to do about that? We're going to make sure that if you attend a 4-year college, that if you are from a low-income community, it is going to be free. And if you're from a middle-income community, it will be highly subsidized. But if you are wealthy enough and have the means enough to pay for college, then you will do it. But if you need to take out loans, we need to tackle the student debt problem. So you will only be capped at a very small percentage of your income for your student loans, so that you're never going to be burdened like myself and others and trying to pay back those loans while trying to decide what type of job that you take. In addition, with student debt, we need to make sure that the rates at which students are loaning are capped at the same rates at which banks loan to each other. Right now, students are getting loans out for student loans between 6 and 11 and 12%, while banks can loan each other out money at 1.2 to 1.6. Students should have those exact same rates. We're also going to invest in community colleges, vocational and technical schools, because we're going to make sure that if you decide to go to a 2-year community college, you're also not going to feel the burden. And it's going to be free for those that are in the middle and lower income. Finally, when we talk about education, it's not just about the students, it's also about adults. And so we're going to use our vocational and technical schools to work on adult education as well. What do I mean by that? We have so many adults who are transitioning into new industries. We talk about that in particular with those leaving the fossil fuel industries and hopefully going into a clean energy industry. We need to make sure that the classes to gain the training and to gain the skills, they're free. So adults don't have the burden of trying to transition into new industries. So that's kind of the whole focus on education. When we talk about combating hatred, bigotry, and anti-Semitism, it starts with the education we talked about, but it also includes passing far tougher hate crimes legislation and calling it for what it is most of the time, which is domestic terrorism. We also have to add additional money for security purposes for our religious and our civic organizations that are worried about being under attack. So those are three of the biggest places, but there's one other place I really want to focus on what I do when I come into Congress immediately. We need to pass comprehensive and compassionate immigration reform. We need to have a pathway to citizenship for the 12 million plus undocumented immigrants. We've already talked about that we need to make sure they have health care for all undocumented immigrants. We need to decriminalize those who enter the United States without authorization. Those are the four big areas, Dan. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, no, absolutely. And then my next question is kind of looking more at the local level of how have you been interacting with the community? How do you feel you represent this community, particularly the town of Dover, with your campaign?
Great. And I actually just drove through Dover yesterday because with my wife on Mother's Day, we did a hike at the Charles River Peninsula in Needham and then drove through Dover to go to Millis, actually, to go to the Cedar River reservation as well. So look, one of the first things we did on our campaign is we visited all 34 cities and towns. We're the first candidate to do it, and I think we're right now the only candidate to still do that, but I'm not sure about that. That's how I'm going to govern, is make sure that the voices of those in Dover, they're being heard, that they're not just a small voice comparably to the Brookline and Newtons and Welsleys of the world. All of our cities and towns need to have a seat around the table, and Dover is part of that. So I would create an advisory council that would have seats from those in Dover and from the rest of the 34 cities and towns. It'd be diverse based on age, it'd be diverse based on race and based on industry. It's something that we need to happen. It's something I've worked on for a really long time, for the last 20 years, especially in the Jewish and Latino communities, on how I've strengthened those communities and built those relationships, and it's how I govern going forward.
All right, and so how, what kind of events do you have coming up, or how will people get more information about your campaign?
Sure, thanks. Well, look, the first most important thing is when COVID-19 started happening, we, like all the other campaigns, switched to digital formats. But what we've done that's really different is today we just had our 20-second Facebook Live conversation with a different expert, religious, and civic leader. Because our whole job right now has been around educating, informing, and supporting the community. We've had medical experts get on. We've had someone talk about workplace development and searching for a job, how to protect and support the most vulnerable in our community. Today we had a session on the biggest challenges affecting the LGBTQ+ community. We had a conversation with the CEO of Eastern Bank, Bob Rivers, on banking during COVID-19. We had a session on how to be a small business owner under these times. And we also had a session on harnessing the impact of your digital voice. Because now that all of us are on social media, on Zoom, and digitally, is we want to make sure we have clear and a consistent voice, and we are really formatting that right within this digital format. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah. And then I assume that there's that website behind you that people can visit. I assume Ben Siegel for Congress.com, it looks like.
Yeah, no, thank you. Look, if you want, we were the first candidate to put up a COVID-19 resource page on our website. So come to bensiegelforcongress.com, where you can learn more about what we're talking about here, why I'm running, the values we're running on, but also check us out on all our social media platforms. At Facebook at Ben Siegel for Congress, on Twitter, and on Instagram at Ben Siegel, and on LinkedIn. And please check us out, ask us any questions, view all 22 plus videos that we've put on to help the community, and join us if you're interested and you're a student and you're interested in an internship this summer as well.
All right, and then, so I think then the next question is, how do you feel like COVID-19 has changed how you run this campaign, or impacted how you run this campaign?
Look, it's changed in so many ways. As I just mentioned, we switched to a full digital format. We've now done all these Facebook Live conversations where I would have been out in the community meeting with people. I think that's one of my greatest strengths, is getting out there and meeting and finding and listening to our community, and then putting a plan together going forward. We were lucky because our campaign started out with going to all 34 cities and towns, including going to Dover right from the beginning. Now that we can't do that other than a social distancing way, like a hike that we did with our family, we're trying to do that through social media and digitally. So our COVID-19 resource page on our website, our Facebook Live sessions, our emails that we're sending out, that's the way we're doing it. It also affects raising money. We're not holding fundraisers because right now the priority needs to be on the community. And so that's what we're trying to do, is help with that. I'm hopeful things will loosen up a little bit, but I think the reality is we are likely not to see any in-person campaign events until the primary on September 1st. So that's why it's so important, if you want to learn more about the campaign, or you want support through our resources or Facebook Live sessions, that you either go to the Ben Siegel for Congress on Facebook or to our website.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think that about wraps up what I had to ask you. Is there anything else you'd like to add before concluding this?
No, all I would say is, look, I'm so thankful to be on the show. And I think the people of Dover really want a leader who can unify us, that can bring us together, a leader that understands what it's like to stand in the shoes of the majority of the district, a leader who is advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not just talking about it, and a leader who understands the perspectives of the nonprofit, the government, and the private sector, because without those, we can't solve the big issues of the day, because the foundation to any strong community is access to opportunities. And that's access to opportunities in Dover for people for healthcare, and access to opportunities to education, and to affordable housing, and transportation, and to clean air and clean water. This is something we all want. I know these are things that the people of Dover want. And so having a leader that wants to bring us together to move that forward and make real lasting change is important. And I believe I am that leader. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for taking the time to talk to me, and good luck with your campaign.
Thank you so much. Stay safe.
Yeah.